What I don't want as a homeowner is the result of cash flow problems, which looks like he stops working on my project because he's run out of money and goes and works on somebody else's project and actively tries to like cut corners on my project so that he can not lose his shorts.
Looking at cost per square foot, it's not an entire remodel. It's really not the way to look at things. That's more for new construction. They can be more accurate with the prices. You're not dealing with pre-existing conditions of a home that you're tying into. So cost per square foot goes right out the window.
And it ended up costing them just as much the second time around to get it done right as they could have cost the first time to just go through the proper steps, do the permitting, get it legal, and have something that's going to be built to last instead of something that's going to be built to last long enough.
We're going to talk about how much remodels cost and why it's so expensive. And we have lots of clients reach out to us and they don't know what their remodel is going to cost. They really even have a tough time figuring out like what a kitchen remodels cost, what a bathroom remodels cost. And then they go out, they talk to some different people, they get some different bids, and that doesn't help at all because they have one bid that's here, one bid that's here, and then one bid that's way up here. And so what we want to do today is take a good 30, 45 minutes and think through like, how do different contractors think about cost? How should different clients think about cost? How do we think about cost to really help people understand cost and remodeling in the different types of remodeling? I'm going to go ahead and kick it off here. And I think it would be great to kick it off with a discussion of how do different contractors think about cost? Because one of the interesting things about remodeling contractors in particular is it's a real low barrier to entry, right? I literally have to be able to read, have $1,000 to take the CCB test, and a vehicle that can transport tools. That's the barrier to entry. If I have that, then I'm a contractor. And so because of that, like you've got a really big swath of different kinds of contractors. You've got, probably, some of the larger contractors, and you expand beyond like our design build space. You've got like DeBella here headquartered in town. You've got Neil Kelly, some really big contractors. DeBella's even got, offices all over the United States, all the way down to the guy who just did take the CCB test yesterday and has a truck and a hammer. And so that's the whole gamut of different kinds of contractors. So let's talk about the way that different kinds of contractors think about cost. And you guys have both worked here for a couple years, and you've got different experiences in different companies. We all know different contractors. So what are some of the different ways that you guys have seen people think about cost?
Yeah, as far as it goes, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as how even what other contractors really perceive as cost, but also even the client's perspective on it. There's just such a variety of contractors on a low scale and high scale. And a lot of them don't really understand that alone, right? They are getting these quotes at low bids, and they're getting these really high-end ones, and they don't really understand what's behind all of that and the reasons of why it is such a long range. Now, as far as how some contractors look at it, now we have to be very specific as to what contractor we're talking about, right? On a design and build firm level, or are we just talking about the entry-level general contractor? And I know when I was a general contractor, when I looked at costs, there was things that were just like automatic costs. And there wasn't really let's creatively think about this per job, like doors and windows, for example. I used to charge, $100 to set the door, and then it was $25 to trim one side. On the other side, it was another $25. So per door, it was $150. Now, that doesn't go for every single door. Now you have to think about exterior doors. Now it was always a $250 charge. And so that in this industry alone has some change to it, just because a lot of the doors and every windows have changed over time. So I've got a father-in-law. He's a Finnish carpenter, and he's still stuck in these old-time price ranges because he actually hasn't worked with other contractors to understand that there's a big difference. So I have to guide him to really help him bring his numbers up. And it's been such a change over the last 5 years. I think dramatically in price swings that
Yeah, totally.
I think it's a surprise, not only to the contractors at the low level that have been operating a business since maybe the late 80s, to really see what it has done to the industry, and to clients too as well. Just a big surprise in all that. So yeah, there's a lot of things that they have to continue to learn and to evaluate and change, because even the procedures of installation for a lot of the products has changed.
And so you're even alluding to the fact that there's different ways to think about pricing, where like you were, in my opinion, like relatively sophisticated as a small-time contractor, because you're already thinking about piece pricing, whereas the other way to do it is like guess hours.
Right.
And there's different, like some items you need to guess hours and you can't do piece pricing. Some items you can do piece pricing, but what you're saying is sometimes people will get stuck in piece pricing where they just stick with that one number for piece pricing and don't realize that inflation has increased it, and so their pricing's too low.
Yeah, no, 100% like that is. In both evaluations of costs, if you're not really growing with the industry, even if you have the lowest prices, you will be left behind in a lot of ways. People will start to see that you're so low that there's got to be an issue there.
So before we go on, because I'm curious what your thoughts are, Jacob, too, but what would be the disadvantage to me as a homeowner to hiring somebody like that, where their piece price is not keeping up with inflation?
Well, I would say again, the procedure of some things and products, the installation has changed, and you could be asking for them to install something that they've never even installed, but they're still stuck on piece pricing. Now they will eat the cost, but your project's going to take a lot longer, and if you're pricing at a time and material, then you're going to eat a lot more than you think you're paying for in the beginning, up front.
Yeah. So a couple things there. One is like if it's a material and time contract, time and material contract, you're going to eat the cost, even though their estimate is low up front.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other is if it's like not a time and material contract, it's fixed price. I've seen this too. Then you end up in a scenario where, because the contractor doesn't really know how to run his company as a business, he's going to hit cash flow problems, which it's not my problem as a homeowner.
No.
But what I don't want as a homeowner is the result of cash flow problems.
Oh, yeah.
Which looks like he stops working on my project because he's run out of money and goes and works on somebody else's project and actively tries to cut corners on my project so that he can not lose his shorts.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's actually what I don't want on my project. I like the idea of getting a good deal.
Yeah.
But if a good deal looks like people not actually working on my project and it taking twice as long, and them cutting corners where I don't notice, that actually doesn't sound like a good deal.
No. Yeah, I had a very, to be even specific, when I was a kid, I worked for a contractor that ran into cash flow problems. And I didn't really know heads or tails of how the industry worked. I was young, getting into it. And I remember I didn't understand that he was running into that issue. And I had to run base molding all around this room or bedrooms, multiple rooms. We did flooring throughout the house. And I put in an order to get more base molding so we could do these rooms. And what I received was a bunch of different pieces of trim with different profiles to them that were similar to stain grade quality, I think even different species of wood. And he expected me to splice all these things together. They were at random lengths. He just took them from his shop. And I didn't obviously install it because my name was on the end of the product, but it was quite frustrating to say the least. So that is something you could totally run into.
Using random ins and outs.
Yeah, I still got to get this room trimmed out, but I don't have enough money to buy the trim, so I'm just going to send out my whatever I've got scrapped around my warehouse here. So it was wild at the time.
Jacob, you've worked for a couple different firms, and I know you've worked for firms that I would see are in this middle range. I feel like a lot of remodeling firms grow. Sometimes they add a little design component, and they get to this mark where the owner's still involved, and then there's he's still doing a lot of the sales. but we're kind of maxing out with his capacity as a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've worked for some really great high-end firms. Like, how have you seen some of these different contractors think about like costing and how to cost out projects?
Yeah, so on a medium-sized scale contractor, a lot of it was just entry-level design build firms. They did run into similar issues where they hadn't built in enough pricing so that they can have warranties later down. Like actually honor something beyond the minimum 1-year warranty. And so once they did run into these issues, then they ended up with, like you say, cash flow problems. So they start trying to pull revenue off of jobs that they have in the works that they're working on elsewhere in order to try and fulfill these warranties on other jobs and take care of their clients. Or they run into cash flow problems and they just don't have the longevity of the company to be able to come back and take care of their clients later. I've seen it in numerous ways. I think everybody's run into an issue where they've had a contractor come out and do some work on a job. They get the check, they do an okay job, and then they disappear when the okay job starts to fail, starts to have issues. Mm-hmm. They're not answering their phone. They're not coming back to do any fixes because they've gotten theirs and they've moved on.
Yeah.
And I've also worked, like I said, some of these higher end companies they offer more warranty, but they also have a whole lot more overhead in order to fulfill that. So this begins that kind of juxtaposition between the high costs and the low costs of the companies. Some of those larger companies, they're going to have more overhead, but they're also going to have more longevity. They're going to be there when you come back for a warranty later. They're going to have support staff that takes care of the problems and the issues. They're also going to have a well planned out project so that as you move through the duration of your project, you go through your rough ends, you get to your drywalls and your finishes, and you start getting into the punch list at the end. They've got more follow through because they've taken more time to plan it out in the design stage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of the other issues I've seen are, you alluded to one where you've got a contractor who underprices his projects and is a little disorganized and kind of like squishes all the money together in a pot, but is like either his production's not dialed in, and so he's not making the profit he should, or his pricing's not dialed in, one of the two generally. And so then he's constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul and moving money forward to finish the last job. And it creates like this cascade of like trying to stay like essentially solvent, but that can't go on forever. Or I have heard, or I know a few contractors who like really separate the funds and maybe experience that problem, but it didn't cause them to go out of business. And so they say, okay, well, we're going to like really separate the funds. So we just have funds for this project going to those subs. And we've got a vendor I talked to just recently where they've got a contractor they're working with, and they've got, a small bill that's overdue for, months because the contractor's like got the funds separate. But the client is delaying to pay the contractor, so the vendor's not getting paid, so they're not able to it creates other issues. But we're kind of getting really far afield. So let me bring us back here. Let's talk about some of the ways, like that was super interesting because you guys both have a super interesting perspective, but let's talk about some of the ways that clients come to us and are thinking about cost. I think maybe the one that's top of mind and most frequent is the cost per square foot. You do the initial video calls with our clients here. You probably get that all the time, Cory.
All the time, yeah. And it's such an unrealistic way to look at things. I just recently had a video call with a client that wanted to do about 1,000 square foot addition on their home. And really, you got looking at cost per square foot, it's not an entire remodel. It's really not the way to look at things. That's more for new construction. They can be more accurate with their prices. You're not dealing with pre-existing conditions of a home that you're tying into. And so cost per square foot goes right out the window. And then in scale, the smaller the project is, the higher the cost per square foot will be. But, I just recently was talking to a client and they researched on Google, where they found a lot of their information. And instead of going 10 pages back to find the true information there, it was, he came with the understanding to the meeting with an $80 to $250 a square foot to do a bunch of work inside of this 1,000 square foot addition. And it's a little uncomfortable to have to educate some people in that because they've been thinking about the project for years, and I'm not really sure where they got that number from. $80 a square foot is, in my experience, unheard of.
Yeah, we got to stop you right there. Like, talk to me about why, this information, because we go to Google and now AI, right, for all this kind of information. But like, why is the information that often people find on Google or Forbes magazine or those kind of places just like not helpful?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say if Google is gonna provide you with a range of costs, well, first off, like it's taking in, a lot of smaller areas of the country where maybe the costs are a little bit lower. So you have these outliers that are bringing things down, and there's not so many bigger businesses that are charging a heck of a lot that are so far off the range. So you can't really get it to recreate it. There's a lot of smaller spaces inside of the country that are charging a whole lot.
So they're bringing data from different places that are not where you live.
Right, exactly. And so it really shouldn't be helpful, especially in your area, because construction even in Portland is going to be different than will be in Vancouver. It could be different I live out in Charlottesville. It would be a little bit different there to a certain extent, but surely southern Oregon is going to be different than up here.
And Iowa's going to be way different than that.
Way different than that.
And I'd also say like the data itself is flawed with how they're getting it. Like most of these places, even like Angie's or House or Build Zoom, like everybody wants to know this information. It's hard to figure out. Right. And so people try to say, well, we'll pull it from different sources. One of the sources they'll look at is permit data. Because when you pull a permit, you need to write on the permit form the cost of the remodel.
Right.
The reason that data piece is flawed is because that cost is often directly tied to how much you pay for the permit. And so the contractor's incentivized to put the lowest possible number on the permit form. And I've even been told by permit reps, most of them say, the people that help you with the intake, they say, well, put on there just the cost of the structural work. Don't include cabinets or countertops or appliances or anything like that.
Yeah.
There was another guy that was trying to be super helpful, and he was like, okay, let me tell you the secret formula. The secret formula is you take the square foot and you multiply it by this number, and that's the lowest possible number we'll accept on that field in the form. Right. So the incentives are not aligned for that to be an accurate source of information.
Yeah.
However you slice it. So that they pull data from there, or they pull data from surveys of homeowners. Right. So when a house asks for reviews, they'll say well, how much do you spend on this remodel? And that's maybe more accurate, especially if you're permit wizard guy there.
Yeah.
So maybe more accurate, but I feel for those types of inquiries, there's a real difficulty for anybody to find any good data.
Well, yeah, and to segue off of that, let's be honest, there's a lot more smaller companies and inexperienced contractors than there are successful, well-established companies out there. So when you're taking that data, it's you've got maybe clients that have done a kitchen remodel in the last year or so that did it for $17K with a very inexperienced contractor, and I've heard the headaches of it, but they got it done for that. And at what point really are they getting all this data? What years are they even taking this from? Yeah. Right? How far back are they going? Is it within this year that they're saying an accuracy to the cost of per square foot? This is what you're going to see this year. Yeah. It's not regional.
With more inexperienced contractors, you you end up with less consistency.
Oh, sure.
So that's where you end up with like and most of them, like, they don't have a system built to estimate. And so they just shoot from the hip all the time. So one project will be way underbid, but that's okay. They don't lose their shorts because the next project they way overbid. And so some people are getting a great deal and some people are getting a terrible deal. And like they hope to like make it all work. And hopefully it'll work out enough that they don't go out of business, I guess.
And then on what level are any of these metrics taking into account the level and quality of the actual finishes that we have that we're putting in? You know, because you can have one job where they're getting everything off the shelf from Home Depot down the street with that remodel and a chuck in the truck building their remodel that's going to have this price point. But then you go to a design build firm that's going to come in and put in high quality, long lasting, durable materials, and they're going to have a much higher price point.
That's fantastic. So give me an example, Jacob, because you work on a lot of our actual estimating. Give me an example, just materials of like the dearth of materials that we put in. And maybe on the low end, like what's the possible cost on an item versus some of what we can do? Just so people have an idea of that range.
There's a huge, I mean, there's a massive range. You could go from, say we have a door off the shelf from Home Depot, who could be, $200, $300. Or you can have one built, custom built for your home, same opening, same kind of function, same kind of door, and be ranging into the thousands. It's a level of quality and craftsmanship that goes into the products that are installed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the same thing, even like almost every product it seems like that has. Like I can go to Home Depot and find flooring for $1.19 a square foot. So what's the high end of flooring you feel like you could get to?
You could move up into $11, $12 a square foot or higher. It depends on what you want to install. Like if you're getting just some basic laminated floor Home Depot stuff, $2 a square foot. If you want nice hardwoods, inlays, if you want to have some sandable finish and some durability so you can sand and refinish this floor for decades to come, you could be looking closer to $7, $8, $9 a square foot, depending on the level of detail, the stains that you put into it, the finishes on top of it. There's water-based, there's lacquer-based finishes. There's so many factors to be considered. It's really hard to boil it down to this is the square foot price because it doesn't factor any of the qualities, the level of qualities of the craftsmanship, the level of quality of the materials that are putting in.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there. Like for a lot of what we do, at least, is custom, right? We don't have any cookie cutter stuff that we do. And so you've got even flooring. You've got material, you've got installation type, you've got underlayment, you've got, I think I said the finish, the wood species, all of those are factors in the cost. And all of them are going to change your cost per square foot to get you from that, $1.99 to, $25 a square foot. Like that's probably your range and you're going to have those factors that change that. But then you multiply that, like that's the floor in the remodel. Like how many selections do we have in a project? Like
how big is the project?
Yeah.
Are we just talking a kitchen? Are we talking a bathroom? Are we doing a whole house remodel? I think Cory mentioned it before. It's easy to kind of box in a price per square foot if you're doing the same thing repeated over time. New construction builds, they generally give you have this set of choices, maybe three. You have this set of choices for your kitchen layout, maybe 2 or 3 different layouts, 2 or 3 different countertops, 2 or 3 different floors. Not necessarily like hundreds to choose from. That's what we do here at a design build firm. Like we can cater your budget and quality ranges by and large to fit within your budget range and give you a good product, rather than you have 3 choices of this floor, and that's all you get. We move on. You got 3 choices of this. It becomes a very cookie cutter, and it's easy to price per square foot if you're doing cookie cutters. But remodeling doesn't work that way. we're going into homes that are 100 years old or homes that are 20 years old. The construction that built that house is different in that 100-year home than their 20-year home. The quality of materials is different. What has happened to the lifespan of the home over that time? Has it had multiple remodels? Has it settled? And now we have one corner that's 2 inches lower in the house than on the other side, and we have to do some factoring to level that back up, so you at least have a reasonably flat floor.
Yeah.
There's so many factors. It's really difficult to nail them all down until we start crunching the numbers. We go through our design process, and we actually give you a catered to your home remodeling contract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. And like we've all walked in, like I think one of the most outrageous things is walking into some of these older homes that are like 100 years old, and there's been 2 or 3 that I've walked in and I'm like, something is not quite right on this floor. And you walk into the basement and they've got like 2x6 joists, 24 inches on center. Mm-hmm. And it's been there for 100 years. But the problem with that for people that don't know is that like you should have 2x12s, so twice the thickness of lumber, like 16 on center. So closer together and twice the lumber. And so when you decrease, the floor joist this way, that makes it bouncier. Mm-hmm. And then if you decrease the number of joists, then everything's bouncier and more fragile. And so, we walk into something like that, and now all of a sudden, most of the remodel cost has to go to fix the floor.
Yeah, I think one that is an interesting way to look at in a sense of a project is even a basement remodel. Now, the square footage in a lot of ways is already there. If you and all of your utilities is all there, so you can hook up to a lot of it. But if you're doing a full basement remodel, it can really change things. And I generally tell people on average what a basement remodel can cost, but then I've had projects just to get the head height for making that a legal living space. I mean, shot that thing up the wall. When you have to do excavation and you have to do basically staged footings throughout their space because it's going below the footing of the foundation, you're really flying that cost up, and really you can't put a cost per square foot because of how far that goes. Maybe you do get lucky and you don't have to bring any of the foundation to the works in that project. But in a lot of ways, if you want to put a bathroom over here, well, how far are we trenching that line to get to your toilet or your shower? And it really, there's a lot of different variations to a project as you both were alluding to. You can't really pin it down to one thing, and there's just so many variables. Historical homes, geez, how would you even put a price per square foot on that? On historic homes, when you've got to really do a remodel there, there's so many hoops and things you have to jump through to get it done. And again, a 100-year-old home has probably got 10 different homeowners' work involved in it, and you're having to deconstruct and bring everything up to code. It's a case by case basis.
And that's really why it's almost impossible on the front end to provide cost per square foot. Mm-hmm. And you really need to work with an expert who knows the space, knows that type of house, knows how to get that done. Like your basement example is great. There's been several basements we've worked with where head height's a real priority for the client, mm-hmm. and we know it's low and they want it to be more. And so we excavate down and it costs a lot, but they end up with an 8-foot basement at the end. Mm-hmm. There's been others where there's a way, especially in the city of Portland, to go ahead and make a space, legal living space, but go ahead and, sign a paperwork and covenant acknowledging that this is below international building code, mm-hmm. But still go ahead and permit it and get their living space. Mm-hmm. But lots of contractors don't know all those intricacies unless they've gone through that process before.
Yeah.
So that's great. Let's talk about how you get a remodel done really cheap. Because this is what some people are looking for. And, we have friends, or we've remodeled our own houses. And so some people will talk to their friend like, well, I did my kitchen remodel for $17,000. How do people do that?
Well, in a lot of ways, they take on the work themselves. When I first started considering even investing into real estate, one of the ways you really should be going about it is, hiring a good contractor that can do the quality work, but doing a lot of the easier tasks like, well, let me just cut some scope off of your bill. Let me order all the materials even. Like I could order all the materials now and then you can install them and you're not paying markups on things, but it is rare to find a contractor that's willing to step into that situation. Right. And then honestly, once you do that kind of stuff, the contractor's not really making a whole lot. So your project's not prior to him at all. You might have paid $17,000, but how long did your project take? And what was the quality in it? And what was the communication? Is he there? Is he coming in on Tuesday, leaving for the rest of the week because he got 3 other jobs? You're the lowest on the totem pole when you try to cut corners with him.
Yeah, but more like in terms of how people accomplish it, it sounds like you're talking about they hire the cheapest contractors they can find. They bite off and do a lot of the work themselves. Like that's where, and so they're investing time into it. That's one way.
Yeah.
Is people buy the IKEA kitchen, and so their material cost is super low. But then if they paid somebody to install it, like an hourly rate of a finished carpenter, it would be very expensive.
Yeah.
But they don't. They put in the time and effort to finish it. Another thing I would say would be they don't pull building permits. That would be great way to, not great. That would be a way that I do not recommend to save costs.
Yes.
But what makes it great is that sometimes you can save a lot of costs.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't, I have heard of people that have done additions with no engineering and no permitting and all of that, and it really, like, sum total saves a lot of money. Talk to us, Jacob, about like what's that do and how do people do that in terms of like what's the effect of permits and lack of?
I would first start with, does it really save them a lot in the long run?
Well,
because I would argue that it doesn't save in the long run. Maybe you'll be able to get through this remodel project and it was pretty cheap. You did a lot of the work yourself. You didn't pull permits. But what happens when you go to sell your home? Now you have to prove how the work was done. Was the work safely done? Was that electrical, that fixture that you put in the wall, was that wiring done right? Is it going to be a fire hazard later? There's also factors where we've had a client in the past who did something similar. They went on the cheap. They got somebody to come in and do a remodel, did not do the proper engineering, the proper permitting on the job. And years later, they were still struggling to get their space legalized with the city. And it ended up costing them just as much the second time around to get it done right as they could have cost the first time to just go through the proper steps, do the permitting, get it legal with the county, with the city, whichever, and have something that's going to be built to last instead of something that's going to be built to last long enough.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you're right. The initial cost for the remodel, cutting permits could save costs, but long term, it's not a good plan. What was that job over in Southwest Portland that he was getting a significant daily fine for having
that was my client.
garage?
Up in Vancouver. Yeah, he had a contractor that didn't pull the permits.
Oh, that was a basement. Yeah,
it was a basement, and he didn't even understand that was going on. Granted, there was a couple red flags up front. Contractor drawing the designs on, grid paper and showing him, here's what your basement's going to look like when I'm finished, and then he got a good price, a very unrealistic price when it came down to it, but he had no idea. The contractor, ran through the project. The only thing that triggered the county was the electrician and the plumber came through, and they were, professionals, and they went and submitted for their permits to pull for their work. And the county rang up the client and was like, "What are you doing to your home right now?" And he's like, "Well, I've got a basement remodel. I'm working with this contractor. Like, you have 0 permits to do that right now. And we're seeing that you have electrical and plumbing going through. We just need to probably do a checkup." And they were they were able to delay the fines in understanding that the contractor kind of screwed him over and he didn't know about it. But he had to do it within 6 months, start getting work performed to get that remedy before they started actually incurring costs to his property there. But yeah, we had to like set up the whole thing and develop all new plans with them. And we put the permits in his name. And this is a good way to even maybe parlay off of that was, how he saved costs was he really had a budget. He already gave this guy a bunch of money. And the guy did do some of the work. Now we had to undo a lot of it, but, we put the permits in his name. We did the work that was really getting things up to building codes, and then he had to manage the rest of the project after that. He had to call this electrician and plumber to do all the rest of the rework that we had to undo.
What are those issues that we commonly see in unpermitted work that create big costs to redo?
He didn't put an egress window in the right size, so we had to go in there and fit a whole window well, cut the concrete for it and everything to get the right height.
So these are building code things that either the contractor doesn't know about who's doing unpermitted work, or the client doesn't know about if they're kind of doing their own work. What else do we see?
Well, some of these codes actually are the benefit to the client, to the homeowner, to making sure that their project is done properly. It's sealed against weather in the right fashions. That is going to be, it's going to have the longevity to last instead of just being something that's thrown together. Similar to what you were talking about before with the 2x6s on 24 center. Sure, there's some construction that can do that, and you can stand a wall up and you throw drywall at it with 2x4s on 24-inch center. But is it going to last? Is it going to be stand up over time?
Yeah.
Common codes for your basement remodels would be 2x4, 16 on center, air gap with a moisture barrier between that and the foundation, potentially even running a sealant on the foundation before you throw your walls up there, sill plates and sill plate foam so that you don't have that any kind of leaking coming in and through. All of these things, they factor into that code. That's why the code was written. It's more to protect the homeowners from people who are doing shoddy work. So having a properly permitted job gets you the second set of professional eyes on your project so that they can be ensured that you're getting something done that's done professionally, done to code, to right. That inspector who's coming in, they don't have any vested interest into this other than it meets the code and it's properly built.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think we tangent a little bit off of this. I would say we talked a lot of the negatives behind going the cheap route. I think what we really were trying to get to was how you could still do an inexpensive project as well. A lot of the negatives we've just recently outlined, but there is ways to get a project in line with something that would be significantly cheaper in a lot of sense. And that's, comes down to quality of the product. You could decrease that. Still something that's sustainable, is going to last for a longer time. Going with a different name brand. There's a lot of sinks out there that we've got that are, let's, for example, workstation sinks. There's ones that are up at $5,000. There's ones that are down at $750. They both serve the same purpose. They do the same thing, but one has a brand name attached to it. And like I said, you could do some of the work yourself as long as the contractor is willing to do that. You can take the project in stages. That could be another way to save costs and make it a little bit inexpensive. If you got kids, have them paint. I always suggest that. In my initial conversations, if we're getting down to the end of the price of a project and they're still a little bit on the fence of it being a little bit too tight on their budget, well, how old are your children? Are they in high school?
Mine are not qualified to paint.
Mine neither. But sure as heck, when we do get there, they're going to be painting every single room in my house. I'm going to have to hire a painter, and so they will. Just taking on some of the things that you can do that are so simple can really make that cost. You just got to find the right contractor to help guide you in the right direction to make sure that you're not cutting corners that sacrifice that could incur costs later. Just guiding you around the path that here's some options here that can really bring things down that don't really change the scope. And again, scope could be one of it, right? There's so many different options. You just have to, there's a lot of negatives to finding a cheap price. Now, if it's too cheap, it's a concern. Just find what you feel comfortable spending. Find the right contractor that can guide you through the decisions that you need to make to get you to that price.
Yeah, yeah. And to follow on what you said about like staging a project, there are a lot of very unpretty costs up front.
Yeah.
If you have, well, let's just keep going with basement remodels. If you have a basement remodel, you're gonna have a lot of engineering. You're gonna have a lot of flat work, a lot of very unpretty dollars in that budget right up front. But we could stage that. A term that's been kicked around a lot lately is a white boxing, where we can come in and we can do a lot of the infrastructure, the rough ends, the plumbing, electrical, the drywall, get everything ready for another stage of a remodel, and so that you can hit your budget. And then you can take a pause and you can start thinking about your finishes and your selections at that point.
Right.
That's a good way to phase it so that folks don't have to bite off a huge chunk all at once.
Yeah.
Come back in another year, you've had a little bit more time to dream about your finishes and your new space, what you want, paint colors, and then come back with a remodel at that point.
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. So in essence, we're saying like, yeah, if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you want to tackle a project, do it. But here's the guardrails. Like, don't cut permits.
Yeah, don't do your own electrical and plumbing.
Don't do that. Like, make sure you're not cutting quality. And the main way you're saving cost is you're actually investing labor into doing your project. And this is assuming you either really love remodeling or you don't have like another job that's making more money than you could hire somebody to do this for. And the other guardrail I'd layer on top of that is I think your comment, both of your comments about cost of materials is important. But guardrails on that, like stick with a known supplier. Like I have had plenty of people like buy product off the internet, especially plumbing and lighting fixtures, right? That's the big one where you can get a plumbing or lighting fixture. I had one of our plumbers installed all of these sinks on this apartment complex years ago. Maybe it wasn't one of our plumbers. Anyway, I don't remember where I heard the story, but he installed like probably 300 sinks in this apartment complex that the owner of the apartment complex decided he was going to save thousands of dollars by ordering them all off like Alibaba or something. And so it was great. He saved tons of money until the inspector came in and said, hey, these sinks are not UL listed, so you cannot install these in the United States. Jerk them all out. So instead of saving thousands of dollars, right, it costs thousands of dollars to have the plumber install and reinstall sinks. So don't do that either. So those are the guardrails. Just like pay attention to some of those things. Don't skip permits. And if you're gung-ho and a do-it-yourselfer, like save money with labor, don't cut the cost of the actual project.
Yeah, there's two things to be said about that, right? It's buy it nice or buy it twice. And I always say buy once, cry once. You can make all these decisions, but just make sure that you're doing the right ones that don't come back to be repeated costs.
That's great. So we've talked a lot about like ways contractors think about costs, ways that don't make sense to talk about costs, like cost per square foot. Like, how do you, Cory, when a client comes to you and says, I got a kitchen remodel, I want to do a remodel, how do I think about budget? What would you say? Like, what sets a client up for success?
I think the first question that they need to answer for themselves, it's not information I can give to them, is like, what have you defined to finance the project? Is this going to be cash? Is this going to be loan? Those are two different conversations you need to have. How much capital are you willing, if you're going with cash, to give up? And really not put yourself in a bind after. Like, obviously you don't want to spend all your money that you have in your bank account for a remodel. You just have to understand what you feel comfortable spending if it's your capital. On the side of a loan, obviously you want to really research your different loan officers and get an understanding of what that interest rate's going to be, and then go back to your finances, because they're going to tell you could shoot for the moon. Oh my gosh, yeah, you have $400,000 in equity. You could pull a $400,000. Well, you wouldn't be able to pull a $400,000 loan, but you could, pull up to 90% in that. And here's how much you can afford. Now, can you really afford that? Probably not. Maybe you could, but you have to go back to that and understand, your expenses in coordination with how much more debt you're taking on. And is that comfortable? So
first step is like
define
understand my financial situation, so I know like what money I can access.
Exactly.
So I've done that. What's next?
Next, in that is, you can now start to reach out to contractors. If that's your first step, you come back and now you're ready to go. You understand what your threshold is. Starting to talk to your contractors and getting the ranges of where you could be.
Now I'm going to ask you, should I share that with my contractor? Because I feel like I hear story after story after story from friends and from clients that talk to us of the contractor's initial budgets here, and then by the time you're done with design, it's increased by 50%. And then by the time you're done with construction, it's increased another 50%. So I feel like there's actually common wisdom in don't tell your contractor how much money you can afford to spend on this project, because he'll spend it all in his initial budget and then it'll double by the time you're done and you'll be worse than broke.
Yeah, and it could. I mean, I would say it's the wrong way to think about it. Think of it as a partnership, right? This is the professional to the industry that you're trusting your information with. In a lot of ways, at some point, you're going to share your home with him. He's going to be in there for months at a time. So if you don't have the real comfortable sense initially to tell him what you financially are able to spend, I think you're going down a really bad path. I think there's so much more to that you have to consider is if you don't give him that number, well, how is he supposed to write you a project that fits within the budget that you do want to spend, right? Yeah. Now, of course, things could double inside of design, but that's an inexperienced contractor that's not really paying attention to your budget and doesn't care. He's going to allow you to float all around here and throw that golden toilet in there and all that sink, sure, and not really keep you in charge of the cost. So, I strongly suggest that they do share that information when they feel comfortable with the contractor that they're at least reaching out to and starting that. It shouldn't be the first upfront information you provide to them. And obviously, I don't think that should be the focus of your initial conversation with your contractor. It should be really about here's the problem that I have so that they can figure out, and maybe there's creative solutions to solve that problem that you don't even know. It should at some point be a budget conversation. It should be something, because when they do come out to your house and they are going to write you an estimate of what it could be, I always give them hey, put everything in the bucket. Tell me everything that you want. I'm going to write you that budget. And then, but based off of our budget conversation when we talked, I'm going to give you maybe a scenario of how you could still get a lot of what you want to accomplish and solve your problem in a creative way. And it fits within your budget. If this one's super far out.
Yeah. So are there contractors out there who aren't going to use all your money up front and then double the contract value?
I mean,
it just goes up and up and up and up.
Yeah, I would say, again, it's a partnership for both the client and the contractor. The client could be equally on the hook for throwing the cost super high up.
Sure.
But yeah, there's contractors that won't do that, I would say. Unbiasedly, we're a perfect example of that. But, there is contractors that you read online, horror stories that do try to take you for everything you want. But, do your due diligence. At least what I always tell people after you understand your finances, talk to 3 different contractors of the type of contractor you want to work with. Is it a design and build firm? Is it just a regular general contractor? Or is it specialty trades, right? Just get 3 quotes. If you're further outside of that, I'd say you're probably going to get the right information that you need to be able to decide. Research your contractor, understand how far back and how long they've been in business, what are the reviews in that sense as well, before you start picking up the first name on Google. Do a little background research and narrow down that search. But that'd be the first and second step.
That's great. What else, Jacob, as a client's thinking about a remodel, would you give them as far as advice, as far as how to think about costs for a remodel?
Well, you have to have it. I think you need to have a end goal in mind. Have your dream put together and be willing to see that follow through in a creative way. Do your research, find out who you're going to be working with, get your end goal in mind, help, that's what the benefit of a design build firm can help you do, is they can work with you with maybe your Pinterest interests or your boards to create a dream board and get some ideas, and then start working in your budget parameters in a good, better, and best kind of fashion,
Yeah.
where we actually have some grade levels of materials. If you want to have this beautiful design, this luxury kitchen, but yet you don't necessarily have the budget to go all the way out for it, we can be looking more in that better range, where you can have some very nice products, some well-rounded fixtures to bring that dream to life, but not necessarily go all the way with the name brand products that are going to run your budget up.
That's great. That's great. So essentially we've got understand your finances and what you want to spend, do research on contractors, be willing to, or try to find a partner who will help you understand how to spend that and spend it wisely. And I'd add a fourth bucket item that I think it's really important when you're hiring a contractor, that you inspect what you expect, right? Because everybody can be great at like talking. And it doesn't mean they're good at anything else. It just means they're great at talking. And that's like the experience that you can have meeting a contractor the first time, is you can see like, this guy is a really personable guy. It actually doesn't mean anything in terms of how well he can actually be a contractor. So what I encourage people to do is inspect as much as possible. Inspect the contract. Is it a true fixed price contract? Or is it a fixed price contract that says fixed price at the top, but then there's language in the contract that means the cost is going to go up?
Allowances.
Yeah.
Right? Allowances are a great
Sure.
way. Like, how did my contract double? Well, I put $2,000 in there for cabinets and it actually is going to cost 40. All right, well, that's why. But like, I'm on the hook for it as the homeowner because that's the way the contract was written. So inspect the contract, inspect the drawings. Most of my experience with contractors that are on that flaky end are like the one you described, where the drawings themselves aren't clear enough to even know what I'm buying. And ask them specific questions. Like, I would ask to inspect, like, talk to me about your last 5 projects. Tell me what the client wanted to spend, what the cost was when you signed the contract, and what was the cost at the end of the project. Now, the contractor could lie to you, and I wouldn't expect those numbers to be exactly the same every time. But like, if I asked that question and got that information from all 5 and even gauged their response, like, that would be a level that I could inspect something that was important to me, which is I could budget for the project. So that's fantastic. And I think that's pretty much a wrap. If you want more info on how to really interview contractors, we have a short contractor interview guide with some specific questions, examples of stuff that you should ask to look at. Go download that on our website. Just search contractor interview guide on the search button. And stay tuned for the other podcast episodes we're doing here, where we're really trying to give you more in-depth conversations about some of the more nuanced topics of remodeling. Thanks.